emphasis on communication. We are quickly having people join our webinar today, so I'm going to give them a little bit of time to be able to tune in, and we will begin before long. We are going to be answering questions at the end of our presentation, but if you have a question, go ahead and feel free to type it in the questions button on your screen, and I'll ask those questions aloud to our parenting expert at the end of our presentation. I have a question already that I can address right now. It is asking if this presentation will be available after today's webinar, and the answer to that is yes. We will have it posted on www.realparentsrealanswers.com, and if you want to use the PowerPoint, you can go to Dr. Popkin's blog on that website, and we will forward you the presentation. Okay, well, we are a little bit past 1 o'clock now, and we have a good number of attendees. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and we will have some more joining us in this very beginning, I'm sure. But I wanted to welcome you to this webinar on effective parenting. As I mentioned, our emphasis today is on communication, and we're going to be answering questions at the end of our presentation. So feel free to type in your questions along the way. I'm only going to have a limited amount of time at the end of the presentation, so I'll ask as many questions as I can aloud to our parenting expert in the order that they were received. To type a question, just click on the questions link on your screen. Also, if you have any trouble hearing us at any time, use the phone number that is provided and call in, or if you've already called in on the phone and lose us, hang up and call in again. All right, well, I think we have Dr. Popkin on the line. Good morning, Dr. Popkin.
Hi, Monique.
For those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Popkin, he is the president of Active Parenting Publishing. He is the author of several parenting guides, including Active Parenting of Teens, Taming the Spirited Child, and Getting Through to Your Kids. And he is the spokesperson for Real Parents, Real Answers. Dr. Popkin, could you give us an overview of Real Parents, Real Answers?
Sure, thanks. It's good to be back with you. I think this is the third webinar we've done on this.
That's right.
I was thinking this morning that I've been teaching parenting education for 35 years now, and writing about it for about 26 years. And one of the things I've noticed is that of all the big risks that parents face and are concerned about, things like tobacco, alcohol and other drugs, violence, sexuality, and things like that, the one that often flies under the radar is smoking. With some of the other things getting so much more of the press, parents often don't really spend the time thinking about smoking the way they do other things. So it's been a great opportunity for me to be the spokesperson for Real Parents, Real Answers, because this is a program that really does focus not on just the risks of smoking, but also what parents could proactively do to help ensure that their kids don't become one of those smoking statistics. So it's great to be here, and we're going to be talking today about some useful information, not just about smoking prevention, but also about the larger aspect of communicating with our kids about a lot of things. RealParentsRealAnswers.com. I encourage you to go to the website after the webinar or sometime this week. There's a lot of good information, not just from me and from other experts in the field, but from parents talking to parents about what they found to be effective for themselves. Like we say in our active parenting groups, about half of what you get in a parenting education program comes from the other parents, not just from the program, the experts. So please go be part of that, be part of the solution, and help each other think about what you can do beyond just what the program suggests. We'll focus on smoking prevention among youth. I've talked a little bit about sharing with other parents. The message board's a great way to interact on the website, and I'll do a monthly blog on there as well that can give you some ideas. Now, what we'll discuss today, we'll begin with the prevalence of underage smoking, talking about the problem a little bit. But we're going to, again, go to the larger picture very rapidly about how to win cooperation with our kids through effective communication. And these are skills that will be useful not just in terms of preventing smoking and other high-risk behavior, but in terms of everything involved in parenting really is geared around communication. We'll talk about channels of communication, the three particular channels that communication's carried, and how to use those effectively, and also how to avoid mixed messages and ways of diluting your communication and your messages. And then finally, we'll talk about a 5-step process that we've been teaching in active parenting classes for a while now called active communication. All right, let's talk a little bit about youth smoking. The good news is that teen smoking is declining and has been now for better than a decade. Smoking by 8th graders is down by 66%. Compared to its peak, smoking is down by 54% among 10th graders and 41% among 12th graders. Those aren't just statistics. You know, that really translates to a lot of lives saved down the road. And since this is a time when we're talking about healthcare expenses, I might also point out that it saves a tremendous amount of healthcare dollars when we can prevent people from getting started smoking to begin with. Unfortunately, there's some bad news too. More than 1/5 of our young people are still smoking when they leave high school. That's 20% of all teenagers. We also know that lifetime smoking habits almost always begin before the age of 18. So those kids that start smoking in high school are the ones that are likely to continue to smoke as adults. Peak years for trying your first cigarette, you may be surprised to know, is middle school, between usually 6th and 7th grades. And because we also know that some kids are more easily addicted to tobacco, sometimes just trying a cigarette can get them started on the process of being hooked on cigarettes. Every day, approximately 4,000 kids try their first cigarette. So still a big problem, still a lot of work to be done, even though because of the efforts of an awful lot of groups and an awful lot of individuals, the percentage of kids smoking is coming down. The big question for us as parents is how do we help our children make the choice not to smoke? And it is a choice. I mean, we'll talk about the difference between, areas that parents have control over and areas that kids do. But ultimately, whether kids smoke or not is going to be a choice. And we want to be able to influence them to make the choice not to smoke. And we can do that, but it will take effective communication as well as effective discipline skills and other good parenting techniques. Effective communication, besides being the way that we're going to influence our kids not to smoke or do other high-risk behaviors, is the foundation, or I should say a foundation, of any healthy relationship. So the better your communication skills, the more likely you are to improve your relationship with your kids and your spouse, people you work with, and everyone else you come in contact with. One of the things that I always like to emphasize is making it clear that you would not approve of your child smoking is half the battle. There's a wonderful study done at Dartmouth University that found that kids who knew that their parents would be upset if they smoked were half as likely to smoke as those kids who didn't know how their parents would feel. So again, half your job is communicate your disapproval of smoking, to be real clear that it's not okay with you if your kids smoke, it's not okay in your family, and you would be upset if you found out that they were smoking. So that's just the baseline, but you accomplish half your goal by just letting them know real clearly. Now, we want to shift gears a little bit and talk about parenting in general a little bit. In active parenting, we focus a lot on problem handling. A lot of people think that problems in life are kind of the exception and that healthy families have few, if any, problems. Actually, I believe very strongly that problems are a necessary part of life, one that provides us with the opportunity and the motivation to improve ourselves, our families, and our communities. All families have problems, not just your family and our family, but all families have problems, just as all businesses have problems, communities, and even nations have problems. The difference between healthy and unhealthy families, though, is that healthy families handle their problems effectively. They learn from them, and they actually grow stronger from them. On the other hand, unhealthy families make problems worse, or they end up being overwhelmed by their problems. So a big part of life and big part of parenting is how do you handle the problems in a family? And the first step we like to emphasize is who owns the problem. In other words, who owns responsibility for handling the problem? Is it the adult or is it the child? And when I use the word child, I'm also using the word teen. So if the parent owns the problem, then it's a situation that calls for discipline. I've got a problem with your behavior. And if you can't change your behavior, then I'm going to provide some discipline to help you remember to change your behavior. So we talked about discipline in our last webinar. Today we're going to focus a little bit more on when the child owns a problem. When they have a problem that really is under their jurisdiction for coming up with a solution or a choice, we want to provide support. And we don't want to just say, that's your problem, I don't care about it, but we want to use good communication skills to help them solve their problem. And this is the way you use problems to teach problem solving. So who owns the problem? How do you tell? Well, there are a few clues. It's not definitive, but some of the things that you can use to help you decide is it a parent problem or a child problem, and occasionally problems are also shared between parents and children. But ask yourself, who's the problem behavior directly affecting? If it's directly affecting the child, then they probably own it. If it's directly affecting you, then it's probably your problem. Another clue is whose goals are being blocked. Again, do you have a goal of having your child get in bed on time, or do you have a goal of your child growing up healthy and therefore not smoking or engaging in other high-risk behaviors? Then it's going to be your problem. A third clue is, does the problem involve health, safety, or your family values? If it does, again, it's a parent-owned problem, which means you're going to want to use discipline to help influence your child or teen to change the behavior. Finally, is the problem one that can reasonably be handled by a child? In other words, if it's something that's beyond their developmental level, their ability to handle it, then you've got to step in and help them solve the problem yourself. Okay, so once you decide who owns the problem, you'll be set up to look at how you can help your child learn from the problem and solve it. This is also a way we develop one of the most important core qualities that you can develop in your child if they're going to succeed in a democratic society, which is our goal as parents, is to help our kids grow up to survive and thrive in a democratic society. And that's cooperation. Democracy is based on the idea that people are a lot more effective when they work together cooperatively with others. I define cooperation in active parenting as two or more people working together in a mutually supportive manner for a common goal. And we know that people that learn to cooperate are going to be much more successful, both at work, both at home, at school, wherever. Parents that tend to be more of a dictator style demand cooperation. You'll do as I say, have a little more cooperation around here. They tend to insist on cooperation. Doormat parents that are overly permissive, hope for cooperation. They hope their kids will cooperate. The type of parent that we're talking about, active parents, go out and win cooperation. We take a proactive approach in terms of developing a cooperative relationship with our kids. And when it works well, then we have that kind of cooperative relationship. We use concepts like mutual respect, which means not only do I show you respect as my child, but I expect you to respect me as well. That's one of the foundations of a cooperative relationship. Participation, another cornerstone of democracy. Democracy means we don't always get our way, but we always get our say, which means we want kids to be able to participate in decisions that affect their lives, not to just do what they're told, but to be actively involved in that, because we want them to go out into our democratic society and participate and to be treated respectfully and to treat others respectfully. So we want to model that at home, and that's a core part of developing a cooperative relationship. Now we want to talk about how we use communication, since that's the subject of today's webinar. How are we going to use communication to build cooperation? I like to say that the road to cooperation is paved with good communication. If you develop your communication skills, you've got a much better chance of developing a cooperative relationship. And how is communication carried? 3 primary channels. And they're not ABC, NBC, or CBS. They're words, tone of voice, and nonverbal cues, body language, and facial expression, one of my favorites. A lot of people think, by the way, that most of the communication is carried by the words. What we find is that words do carry the majority of communication when you're talking about facts and logistics and things that are very content-driven. Like if I ask you to give me directions to the shopping mall, then your words are going to be paramount. But in emotionally charged communication, where there are problems involved and people have feelings, then more often it's the tone of voice and the nonverbal cues that give you the most communication and channel most of the communication. What happens sometimes is that these 3 channels of communication don't always carry the same message. We call this a mixed message, when one line of communication is saying one thing and one or more lines of communication are saying something else. Okay, so communicating with your child involves a lot more than what you say and a lot more than what they say. I guess I've already covered the point that in emotionally charged communication, people often pay most attention to the body language, then the tone of voice, and lastly to what's said. So you want to be real cognizant of what messages you're communicating through your facial expressions, your body language, your tone of voice, not just what your words say. Often how you say something is even more important than what you say. So a communication message might be something like, a mixed message might be something like, let me take a look at the next slide, something like...
Dr. Popkin, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
You mentioned emotionally charged communication, but when parents are feeling the emotion during the talk with their kids, could you give some tips on how you would recommend handling it?
Well, when I say emotionally charged, if you have a lot of emotion in the communication, and one of those emotions happen to be anger, then you want to make sure you turn it down a notch so that you don't blow your child out of the water with your anger and your fury about something, because as soon as you start communicating with that anger, it's going to turn your child off to hearing what your real message is. They're just going to know that he's angry at me again, she's angry at me again, they're always on my case. And if it's a regular pattern, you need to really take a deep breath, calm down, and find a way to slow it down. Sometimes that means actually excusing yourself from the situation. Bathroom technique is a great one. Just excuse yourself and go to the bathroom. That's one of the few acceptable places to go where you can be alone and splash some water in your face and just calm down. Then come back and try it again when you are calmer. You can occasionally get away with being angry with your kids if it's an exception and they see it as, hey, this is really important to them. But save it. Save it to those times when they're doing something that really is dangerous to them. If you catch them smoking and you get a little angry about that, that can be a good thing. If they see you're mostly calm and you don't get angry because they're 5 minutes late to dinner, or you don't blow your stack routinely, that's going to make a bigger impact. So use your emotions wisely. Don't just get into a pattern of being angry and harsh. Okay, so where are we? Mixed messages. Okay, let's take this situation. Parent finds a cigarette in the child's room. If their reaction, spoken in anger, is, and I'm going to try to say this a little bit of anger, it's your body. If you want to make yourself sick, go ahead and smoke. Now, what's the mixed message here? You know, my tone of voice and my facial expressions are saying I'm angry about this, but my words are saying it's your body. If you want to make yourself sick, go ahead and smoke. That's not congruent. So we're looking to be able to match our words with our emotions, which will come through our tone of voice, our facial expressions, and our body language. So if you can calm yourself down a little bit and then say firmly, you know, because you are upset, you do care, but to say firmly, I care too much about your health to allow you to smoke. So you can either stop on your own immediately or we'll get you some help to stop. Either way, we're going to watch you more closely to make sure you're making better choices. And if we need to add some other consequences, like keeping you home more often, we'll be glad to do that too. Okay, so in other words, my words are saying this is serious, my tone of voice is saying it's serious, and my facial expression. So when you get all three levels of communication on the same channel without getting too angry, you know, or going over the top, you've got a very powerful message. Now, this is a communication in this case where the parent owns the problem, where we're saying that this is a discipline situation. We've got a family rule. It involves health and safety and family values, and the rule is kids can't smoke, and that's regardless of whether parents smoke or not. You know, I hope you don't smoke if you're an adult, and if you do, that you take some steps to give it up. But it doesn't matter. The rule still in every family needs to be kids and teenagers can't smoke. You know, that's not open to debate. So that's not a child-owned problem. Okay, where are we? All right, so let's say your child has a problem. You can see on the smoking example, I've said that it's not their choice about whether to smoke or not. I mean, certainly they can choose to smoke and go against family rules, but it's a parent-owned problem, so you've got some discipline in that last statement. But let's take the other side of that. Okay, the rule is I can't smoke, but how am I going to tell my friends when they offer me a cigarette that I don't want one? You know, that is a child-owned problem. You know, how are you going to do it? You know, how are you going to deal with those kind of pressure problems and situations is something that the child has a right to decide. And we want to be able to help them make a good decision about it. So whenever your child comes to you with a problem, or you see they have a problem, because, you know, we're not the only ones that speak in mixed messages. Kids will too. You know, you might say, how you doing? I remember one of the videos from Active Parenting. The little boy Ben, or Matt, comes in and sits down at the table when he's got a really down, discouraged look on his face, and he says, you know, his mother says, how you doing? He says, oh, okay. Well, he's not doing okay. She sees very clearly that his body language, his tone of voice, his facial expression all say, I've got a problem, but his words say, I'm okay. So she tunes in and sensibly starts to ask him about how his day went and is going to be supportive of him. So when you see your child has a problem and you want to be helpful in teaching them how to solve the problem, you know, they're supported in making some decisions and helping them learn to be good problem solvers, the first thing you want to do is to make sure you don't block communication by saying something that turns them off. And we all have our communication blocks. None of us are perfect communicators. Some people tend to command. They go in there and they want to tell the child how to solve the problem right off, which kind of communicates at a unconscious level. I don't think you're smart enough to come up with your own solutions. Others placate. They, you know, say, oh, you're so smart, or you're so pretty, or don't worry about that. You know, why don't we go do something fun? You know, which again says I don't think you have the wherewithal to handle some negative feelings. Some parents are sarcastic. Others give advice. Some come off as a know-it-all. Others criticize. Well, what did you do to make her do that? Or, you know, what did you say? And again, that just anything that the parent says or does, tone of voice, words, body language that influence the child, that sharing a problem to end the communication is a communication block. Negative expectations, distracting, moralizing, you know, the list goes on and on. So we've got to first tune into what we tend to do to block communication and then retrain ourselves not to do that. that we don't have to solve the problem right away. The goal is not to give the child the right answer so they can run along and solve a problem. The goal is to help them learn to be effective problem solvers, to learn to cooperate with others, namely us, as well as the people they've got the problem with. So we want to take some time and really do it slowly and not try to just take over and come up with a solution. So let's get back to the problem handling method. All right, who owns a problem? Let's say this is a child-owned problem. They've got a problem with a friend. They've got a problem with a teacher. They've got a problem, learning to tie their shoes. Whatever it is that is their problem, how to say no to smoking when someone offers them a cigarette. First step is to avoid blocking communication, so we try to get an open line of communication going. And we want the child to handle it, but we want to offer support in how they handle it. And that's where the active communication process comes in. And we'll go through this in a minute. It's a 5-step process that can really help you use that problem as a way of teaching your kids all kinds of useful information.
Dr. Popkin,
yes.
could you touch on a few more examples of age appropriateness and issues that kids should resolve themselves at particular ages?
Sure. I can't give you a whole list because age appropriateness really depends a lot, not just on the age of the child, but also how mature they are and how good they are at solving problems. But you do want to really consider the health and safety of the situation. You don't want them to take unsafe risks. They don't get to, solve the problem by deciding, if they can play out in the street or not when they're, 5 years old. That would be an incredibly unsafe risk. So in those cases, the parent has to own the problem and step in with discipline. Now, if you're talking about a 13 or 14-year-old, they might be able to make that decision on their own, but you're still going to have to monitor that based on, your neighborhood, if it's a busy street or a cul-de-sac or this or that. So you need to know the situation a little bit better. And what that gets into, too, is talking to other parents. One of the things I love about parenting education groups is you get about half of what you get from the program and the leader, but you also get a lot from just interacting with other parents. Thinking about what's safe in our community or our neighborhood for kids at different ages, and what problems can they decide how to solve on their own, and where do we need to step in and take over. As kids get older, certainly they can take on more and more of the responsibility for problems. We'll take another example, like problems with friends. Even young kids can handle a lot of the problems they have with friends. Well, young meaning 6, 7-year-olds. But a 2 or 3-year-old, you're going to want to step in pretty early and teach them how to share and take turns and do things like that. But even a 10 or a 15-year-old, if the problem is such that they're getting bullied and there's some physical risk to their safety involved, then again you've got to get involved and sometimes and talk to the school or the teacher or even law enforcement if it gets to that. So it's hard to give you a really definitive answer on that, but talking to other parents is certainly a good way to help get an angle on that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's look at the active communication process. 5 steps that can help you support your child when they have a problem. 1, listen actively. 2, listen for feelings. 3, look for alternatives and evaluate consequences together. 4, offer encouragement. And 5, to follow up later. Now I'll take these one at a time and talk about them in a little more depth. The first step, listen actively. It's very encouraging for kids to have their parents' undivided attention when they've got a problem. So turn off the TV set, sit down. If it's a teenager, maybe you're not sitting straight in front of them, eyeball to eyeball, sometimes sitting a little bit to the side or doing something actively while you're talking. But they need to know that you're really tuned in to what their problem is. And as you're tuned in, you want to acknowledge what they're saying. You're not just listening blankly, but it's sometimes as simple as the uh-huh, or I see, or yeah, and nods of the head. Sometimes it's reflecting back a little bit. Let me see if I understand it right. You were just sitting there, and Jennifer asked you to pass a note to Susan, and when you took the note, the teacher looked up and caught you. Is that what happened? So again, to get some clarification on what they're saying. But you're not, again, leaving it at that. You also are listening for the feelings. Talk about the importance of communicating feelings as well as just the facts. Empathy is the ability to listen and to feel some of what your child's feeling. So if they're sharing something that they're excited about and happy about, you want to feel some of that excitement and some of that, the positive feeling. If they're feeling scared, you want to feel a little bit of that, or angry. So the more you can tune in and empathize with those feelings, the more connected they're going to feel to you. In fact, there's some good research now on brain development that suggests that when a person feels felt, they use the expression feeling felt by another person, that it's actually very calming on the person's mind. It actually calms them down and helps strengthen certain neural connections that enable them to grow and to develop more effectively. So it's not just touchy-feely stuff. It's really brain chemistry stuff. Okay, so we're listening for feelings. That's the step 2. You want to acknowledge and accept your child's feelings. When they can accept and acknowledge their own feelings, that'll help them refrain from acting out these feelings through misbehavior or suffering from stress-related illnesses. Let me explain what that means a little bit. You hear the term acting out quite a bit. It really has become almost a synonym for misbehavior. My child's misbehaving, my child's acting out. And because of that, it's really lost its meaning. What it really means is they're acting out their negative feelings. They're acting it out through behavior. And what we want to do by helping kids identify what they're feeling and being able to verbalize that feeling with a word, angry, scared, hurt, whatever the feeling is, then that reduces the need for them to communicate that feeling through misbehavior. So when we can connect at that level, and we're not just helping them feel felt at this point, we're also helping them being able to put those feelings into words. Let's try some examples of parental responses here. Okay, this is really a scary situation for you, isn't it? Or I can tell you're worried about how to handle the situation. Now, if you look at those 2 sentences, where's the feeling word? In the first sentence, it's the word scary. So you've tuned into your child. You've picked up that they're feeling afraid. You want to try to put it in a way that's not, put down. You don't want to say, oh, you're just afraid. But you want to empathize. You want to kind of feel like, what was me? And I'm 7 years old or 10 years old or whatever your child is. This is a really scary situation, isn't it? What's the feeling word in the second sentence? I can tell you're worried. The word worried is a feeling word. I can tell you're worried about how to handle the situation. What would happen? So if you're right and you hit it right, your child's going to say, yeah, and they'll keep talking. It's kind of a little bit of a amazing phenomenon. You get a recognition reflex. They say, yeah, or their head nods up and down, and they keep talking. If you miss the feeling word, this is a really scary situation for you, and you're wrong, but you're sensitive and empathic about it, they can correct you. No, that wasn't scared. I was angry about it. What right did they have to, what right did the teacher have to get mad at me when I was passing the note? I didn't start it. And I wasn't scared of her. I was angry at her. So, oh, you were angry. I see. You felt like it wasn't fair that you did that. And you continue the communication. That still opens up the channels of communication. So you make a guess at the feeling. You do it tentatively. It sounds like, or I can tell. But, if you're wrong, your child gets to be the expert on what they feel. So if you miss, that's no problem. You just correct it and move on. And so what you're doing is establishing this empathy and rapport, and they're identifying the feelings and how it's connected to what happened. But we don't leave it there. That does a lot of good for a lot of people. Just feeling felt can really help a lot of people calm down, feel supported, and they go off and solve a problem. But I like to take it a couple steps further. I think we can also help them look for alternative ways to solve the problem, and then also evaluate the likely consequences of each of those alternatives. Let's look at that a little more closely. This is actually problem solving. To solve a problem, you need to see what are my solutions, what alternatives do I have here, and what's likely to happen if I try this alternative. Predict the future a little bit. Well, what if you were to just tell your teacher, I didn't start it, so-and-so passed the note to me first? What would likely happen? Well, I'd get a reputation being a tattletale. And, kids don't like tattletales in our school, so that wouldn't work for me at all. So what happens with kids and with teenagers, because the front of their brains are developing lastly, kids start to develop their brains from back to front. The athletic aspects of it, the balance and those things in the back develop very early. Motivation develops next, then emotion. But the prefrontal cortex up front, behind your forehead, that part of the brain that's sometimes called the executive center, that develops last. In fact, they're finding now that it develops as on into the mid-20s or even up to 30 before it's really fully developed. And one of the things that prefrontal executive function of the brain controls is risk assessment. What are the risks involved in this? What's likely to happen? And so that's why you see teenagers so often, we've known this for decades, that they act invincible, like nothing's going to hurt me. Well, now we know why that's true. Why they believe that is because they haven't fully developed that prefrontal cortex that helps them recognize those risks. And that's why it's so important for parents to step in with things like smoking and say, I know you don't think you're going to be the 1 in 3 that gets cancer or some other disease that kills you from smoking. But I know those risks are too high to take, and that's why we have a rule in our family that you can't smoke. It's simple as that. We'll talk about some of the reasons for it besides the health reasons, but bottom line is we as parents have to be able to step in and help them slow their engines and understand what may happen 20 or 30 years down the road. So anyway, back to the general looking for alternatives and evaluating consequences. We want the child to think of alternatives on their own. So if we want to go back to a smoking example, they understand the rule is no smoking, but what are you going to do if you're offered a cigarette? What can you say? And that's where you want the child to think about, well, I could use my sense of humor, or I could just tell them, no, I can't do that, or my parents would ground me for life, or whatever it is that they're comfortable saying. Then you can also suggest options on how to handle the situation yourself. If they're not thinking of an example or want your opinion, you can gently offer some alternatives. Well, what about saying something like this? Or have you thought about that? Or would you like to know what some people do in that situation? Again, you want to do that tentatively, not as commanding or giving advice or telling them what to do, but again, just putting some more options on the table. And when they come up with options, or you do, again, you always want to ask, what do you think might happen if? What might happen if you made a joke? What might happen if you just said no? And you can also, a third thing you can do is to share a personal story that sometimes mirror the issue at hand. This is not when I was your age, I walked 5 miles through the snow to school as a way to, kind of cajole your child into something or to, add a little guilt or something. But if you've got a story that can really provide some insight, something that can help them, think about a way that you handled it that might work for them, or maybe not, but, leaving it in their hands, then that can be helpful.
Dr. Popkin,
yeah.
in the case of peer pressure to smoke, if the parent when they were young made bad choices and gave in to peer pressure and smoked, do you still recommend the parent to share that story? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, well, a couple of reasons. One, it's good for kids to know their parents weren't perfect. Take some of the pressure off. You see your parent is perfect all the time and never having made any mistakes, then that's really hard to live up to that. So you get a little bit of benefit out of that. But the bigger issue is that it can be a good learning lesson for them. There's an old saying that there's no substitute for experience. I like to say that there's no substitute for someone else's experience. We don't have to make all the mistakes ourselves. We can learn from other people's mistakes, and often that's a less costly way to learn. So just make sure that you emphasize that it was a mistake and one you wouldn't repeat. I did some dumb things as a teenager, and smoking was one of the dumbest. Fortunately, I figured that out and quit, when I was in college. And if I had to do it over again, I would have never, put those chemicals in that smoke in my lungs to begin with. But, sometimes teenagers make mistakes, and that's one that I don't want you to make. You'll make some of your own mistakes, but that's what I can tell you. And we've learned a lot more since then. The knowledge about smoking, just in the past 20 years, I think everybody understands that it's a deadly thing to undertake. I mean, the research is that 1 in 3 people that smoke regularly will die from a smoking-related disease. So you also have to help your kids understand that just because you got away with it, maybe you smoked for 20 years before you quit, and you're still not experiencing any of the health problems with it. Or, everybody seems to have an Aunt Claire or somebody that lived to be 100 and smoked, until the day she died. And, so, smoking's not that terrible. Well, again, if 1 out of 3 smokers die, okay, 2 of them got away with it. Maybe, 1 out of those 2, have, coughing problems or breathing problems or some other smoking-related illness. But those are terrible odds. And you have to help the kids understand that 1 out of 3, terrible odds for something that just tastes good. That why in the world would you want to take that kind of risk? So, yeah, you can use yourself as a negative example, and hopefully as a negative example that learned from your mistake and took action correcting it. Particularly if you did stop smoking, how great to be able to say, I can promise you that it's a lot more addictive than people think, that it's a whole lot easier to start smoking than it is to quit smoking. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, and I don't want you to ever have to go through that. Okay, where are we? Let's see the next slide. The palms up approach. I didn't get to that. That's something again we teach in the Active Parenting of Teens program, that you want to really physically turn your palms up and say to your teen or your child, I don't know what you'll decide to do, but I'd like to talk to you about it. And by turning your palms up and taking that kind of verbal approach, it says, the problem is in your hands, not mine. This is your problem. I'm not here to tell you how to refuse a cigarette. I'm not here to tell you what you should do with your teacher or your friends after the note passing incident, or any other problem that your child or teen owns. But I want to help you think about it. Now we do an activity where we actually role play, where a child says, something like, I'm not sure how I'd handle it. My friend wanted me to try a cigarette, and the parent takes the finger-pointing approach, actually takes a finger and points it at the child and says, here's what you need to do. And see how you'd feel if you were the teen or the child in that situation versus you come back and play it again. The parent says, this time, what you choose to do is ultimately up to you, but let's look at your options, okay, with your palms up. Now, which one opens communication and which one blocks communication? Now, obviously, the first one blocks the communication. The second one is more likely to engage your child and help him or her be able to really feel good about talking to you about it. Now, remember, this is when the child owns a problem. Whether they smoke or not, that's not a palms up question. I don't know what you decide about whether to smoke now at 16. That's not something you would say, because that's not their problem. That's your problem. And so that's going to be something firmer, which is it's not okay to smoke, and here's my reasons for it. All right, the fourth one is to offer encouragement. You're talking about a problem, and kind of ties into the whole area of encouragement. We spend a lot of time in active parenting talking about ways to encourage your kids as opposed to discourage them. We often discourage our kids, but encouragement to instill courage in our children is a great way to motivate them to keep trying, particularly when things are difficult. So 4 ways that you can encourage your kids. One is to focus on strengths. They're so often they hear what they're doing wrong and mistakes they make and shortcomings they have that we want to turn the tables and to really focus on their strengths. So you could say something again in this conversation about how would you say no to someone that offering you cigarettes is, saying something like, I've seen you stand up for yourself before. You can do a good job with that. Like when you stood up to your big sister or to me, and think of an example to build on. That's a way to say, I know you can do it. It kind of ties into the second one, which is to show confidence in them. I know you can handle it. You got and point out the strengths that they have. Another thing that we look for in terms of encouragement is to stimulate independence. We want to teach our kids to stand on their own 2 feet and to learn to deal with problems on their own. Now, we're supporting them in doing that and helping to teach them, but ultimately I know you can handle it. That means you don't go in there and solve the problem for for them. You know, you don't call up the friends to tell them, don't offer my kids cigarettes anymore. Or you don't run down there and lay the law down to the teacher because your child got in trouble for passing notes in class. You want to teach them to handle problems, and that's where this active communication can help you show them the confidence to make decisions themselves. Now, sometimes this can backfire, not backfire so much, but I remember when our daughter, Megan, was about 4 or 5 playing a video game one day, and she was zapping the bad guys in the video game and saying, take that, you dumbhead, take that. And I said, Megan, you know, I don't like to call names. And she looked up at me with a big smile and said, I do. So even then she was starting to become a little independent. So you have to sometimes live with some decisions they don't like, or you don't like. One way to really encourage your kids is to learn to value them for who they are, not just about what they do, not just about their achievements or their behavior, but really just to help them understand that you love them, you value them, and you're so glad that you're a little boy or little girl. And when they get that message from you, that really forms the core of self-esteem. You know, I got to say, you know, I talked about empathy earlier. My wife is so good about communicating with our kids at that level of, you know, I feel what you're feeling, and I value you for who you are, that you're just, you know, been such a blessing in my life, that, you know, our kids have an incredible relationship with her because of that empathy and that communication and that valuing them for who they are is just a special gift that she gives them, and that any parent can really, if they really look deeply into their hearts, can give to their children. I used to tell the story about Tim Wakefield, the pitcher for the, gosh, I think he's with Boston now, but he was a young pitcher, you know, 12, 13 years ago, and pitching in his first postseason play, they asked him if he was nervous, and he said, no, not really, and they said, why not? It's the biggest game of your career. And he said, because I know that no matter what happens tonight, tomorrow 3 things will still be true. My parents will still love me, my friends will still love me, and God will still love me. And that gave him the confidence to go out, and he's been a successful pitcher for 12 or 13 years. Now, his skill doesn't hurt any, but the fact that he knows that win or lose, or if he's successful or not successful, it doesn't mean that he's not a valuable, loving, worthwhile person. You know, that's the real core of self-esteem, and that's the gift that if you can give that to your kids, that'll help not only prevent them from doing reckless things like smoking and using drugs and other things, it'll really help them be successful in any area. Okay, the last step in active communication, to follow up later. You know, you want to come back to them after they've had a chance to put the alternative that they decided to into play, and then process how it went. You know, what were the consequences? How did it work after you did that? If it was successful, then you could encourage them. Great, glad that worked out. You know, nice job. If it didn't work out, you go back to step 1. Listen actively, listen for feelings, look for other alternatives, predicting the consequences, encourage again, and then follow up again later. So it's just kind of ongoing problem solving sometimes. Don't get upset and don't let them get upset or down because the solution didn't work. That's, you know, you like to say that mistakes are for learning. Sometimes you try something, it doesn't work. Well, that tells you, gives you some good information, tells you what, you know, one thing that doesn't work in this kind of situation. So look for, you know, plan B. Someone once said every successful person has a plan B. You know, it's not always plan A that is what's going to take you to solving the problem. Okay, in conclusion, when it comes to making a decision about whether or not to smoke, parents are one of the greatest influences in a child's life. I want to encourage you to remember to talk with your child about not smoking early and often. Early meaning when they're young, and often meaning as they get older. You know, a child that might make the decision not to smoke at 5 or 10 or even 15 can come in with a group of peers that put pressure on them and change their mind. So don't make it a one-time deal, but keep emphasizing that this is a family value, a rule in your family. It's something that you feel really strongly about. You've got reasons for that you'll discuss with them, and you'll want to persuade them, but it's not negotiable. You might just save their life when you do that. And again, please visit us at realparentsrealanswers.com and share some of your own stories and successes. Ask us questions and get involved.
We have a few questions on hold here that I wanted to bring up. The
Sure,
first one, and I had several people ask me this, they wanted to get some details on how to access this presentation after we are done today. And what you need to do is go to www.realparentsrealanswers. If you want to have us send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, go to Dr. Popkin's blog, and on his blog page there is a link called Questions, Comments. And if you would just send Dr. Popkin a comment asking for the PowerPoint presentation, we will get that to you right away. And then within a week or two, we will be able to have the PowerPoint recording or our presentations recording up on the website as well. And to find that, you will go from the main page to the Multimedia Center, and there is our last webinar is up right now, and it will be being replaced before long with this current webinar. Okay, so let me see. This one had nothing to do with smoking, but let's go ahead and take it. This person asked Dr. Popkin, I found a condom in my son's room. I was placing his clothes away. Should I speak with him? He's 16 years old.
Absolutely. That's, what you share, and again, one of the things I've said for years about sexuality is we don't try to tell you what values to have about sexuality for you or your kids, or about a lot of things as well, but we can share with you the communication skills for communicating those values. So depending on where you're coming from, it will determine what you share about that. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to really talk about, are you being sexually active, and then to talk about your values and his values about sexuality, but not just about sexuality. When you get into that area, you also need to talk about your values related to the opposite sex, about how you treat, in this case, if it's your son, how you treat young women, and to really open it up to communication. I watch your communication blocks. If you start that conversation, but you come off judgmental or criticizing or moralizing and too heavy-handed about, you've got your agenda and you're going to push it down, then they're likely to clam up and you won't be able to have much of a conversation there. You can't totally control kids. And when you try to, you lose your ability to influence them. What we're really trying to do is to influence, and that means to be sometimes more gentle when you're talking about that.
The next question?
Sure.
Reads, my oldest son is 5 and thinks that smoking is cool. We do not smoke in my house. How do we encourage him not to pretend to smoke? We have told him that this is very bad and not to, but I am afraid that he will feel pressured later. What should we do?
Yeah, sounds like if he's 5 and he may be doing it as a way to rebel a little bit, that if you're telling him it's not cool and he's saying it is cool, it is, and you keep trying to get him not to smoke, I'd recommend you back off for a little while. At 5, he's not, obviously trying real cigarettes. It's possible, but the youngest I've heard is about, 7 or 8-year-olds, and that's rare. It's usually a little bit older. And then look at building your case about smoking more subtly. If you see someone smoking on TV, talking about it's yucky and a stinky habit, and you see someone smoking on the street, talk about it like that. But don't try to force it down his throat at this point, or you're likely to get just into more of a power struggle if that's what he's doing.
Okay,
got another one?
Yes, I do. The next question says, do you know a good book that explains brain development for lay people?
Oh, brain development for lay people. I'll have to give it some thought. There are some good ones out there. Can we put that on the website?
Yeah. In fact, if this person would go ahead and email us using Dr. Popkin's blog, I will make sure that she gets her question answered.
Yeah. We do a little bit of it in Active Parenting of Teens, which is the parent's guide that goes with the Active Parenting program. But that's only maybe about 8 or 10 pages worth. If this person wants a whole book about it, there are a number of in-depth books now about brain development, and I'll give you a couple we can put on the website.
Okay. Let me see what this little question says. Sometimes my 8-year-old is overwhelmed by a problem she owns. When we look for alternatives together, she will often get frustrated by my asking, what do you think might happen if you try X, Y, Z? Her response is a loud, I don't know. How can I support her without overwhelming and frustrating her?
Well, then you might have to just say, let's try it and find out. But keep a positive attitude about it. Unless it's something you know is going to be disastrous, and then you might say, well, one time I tried something like that. I mean, if you did, and it didn't work out so well. Or, that's where you can also put your own suggestion in there. Well, what do you think about trying this? Does that sound like it might make sense? But you've got to be able to let them know that it's okay if it doesn't work out. Things often don't work out. So let's try it and see what happens. You want to give it a shot? And then again, make sure you follow up later. So you ask her how it went. If you don't follow up, then they feel like, one, you didn't really care that much about it. You were just going through, some motions. The follow-up is what says, I really am interested. I'm really concerned about, did you solve your problem? And plus, it gives you a chance to fine-tune it if it didn't go so well.
Okay, let's take one more question. This one says, my son's friends are openly saying that they cannot wait to be older and start drinking alcohol. They say it looks cool. How should I handle this? My son is 12 years old.
Yeah, alcohol is a real tough one in our society right now. That teen drinking is pretty much rampant. And it gets worse because a lot of teens binge drink, which gets them into really a high-risk situation where they're drinking not just to drink but to get drunk, and makes them targets for crime and accidents and all kinds of things. So you need to use many of the same skills that we try to teach in terms of smoking prevention. We also teach them in active parenting for alcohol and drug prevention as well. And that involves a lot of components. One is the discipline part of it, which is to set up consequences that if you drink, these are the kind of things that your mom or your dad and I, are going to do. We're going to keep you home more often. You're not going to go to parties. You're not going to get a car. If you've got a car, you're not going to be able to keep your license. Or you're not going to be able to drive. So we'll take some discipline action, but you also want to use persuasive techniques, too, to talk about why drinking, certainly drinking in excess, but any drinking really for a teenager is harmful. I mean, and that may get into showing some of the brain research that it does interfere with healthy brain development and can limit your brain functioning later on. So it's a whole lot of approaches in one, but not one to take lightly. At 12, he's not drinking, and you got to let him know it's, drinking is something that you are allowed to do when you're 21.
Okay.
Then you got a whole other case with drinking too, because college is a whole other can of worms when they're 19 or 20 and they're living in a community where there are lots of 21 and 22-year-olds that are drinking, and you may have to decide what what you want to communicate at that point with them too.
Okay, Dr. Popkin, we are at the end of our hour. Thank you to everybody who attended, and thank you, Dr. Popkin, for giving us some insight today on communication and keeping our kids from smoking.
You're welcome. Thanks. It was good being with you.
Okay, this concludes our presentation. Goodbye.